Next, we will hear from Edwin Black, who has had works published around the world in many languages and received multiple awards. You have to know that in order to accomplish what he accomplishes, he has to be very organized. And I've seen his TikTok schedule, which is by the 5 minutes, and he even included time to get lost on campus to make this event happen. If you'd come ahead. Thank you, Mr. Black.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Ken, for your remarks. I listened carefully, and I learned a lot. A number of people were very responsible for me coming here. It's been a long time in the planning, and I'm doing, I think, 6 events in Northern California on various topics. And I, too, would like to give thanks to Tiffany, to Kelly, and to Greg for interacting as they have in a very organized fashion, and yes, sometimes even within 5 minutes, according to my schedule. And also I'd like to thank Alex Mayer and her partner and all the many others who made it especially possible for me to be here tonight. And our topic today is public health, historical underpinnings, and potentially repressive policies. We'll have to start by asking, when did public health enter the scene? When did one make the jump between personal health and public health? And we're going to be going into that, and then we'll talk about where we're heading, which is not a pretty place. I made about 33 pages of notes, but they're in large type because I can't see very well anymore. So I just finished this research a few minutes before I got here, so it's all fresh. And so I'm going to go back in history, medical history. How far back do you think I should go?
1500s.
1500s. Okay, what about you?
1,000.
1,000 years. 1,000 years. Brain surgery. What do you say?
1860s.
1860s, okay. Vaccine. What do you say?
About 1800.
1800, okay. And what do you say?
Sure, 1800 sounds good.
Okay. Let's start with brain surgery, 9,000 years ago. About 9,000 years ago, we see in Neanderthal and many other primitive groups, brain surgery. It's called trepanning. And a 2.5 to 5 centimeter hole is made in the brain. As you can see, it's not a crack, but a very carefully beveled hole. And there are many societies that still do this. And throughout the ages, these holes have been made in the brain, and the brain has been massaged in various ways because this was their attempt 9,000 years ago to engage in personal medicine. So in Mesopotamia, about the 18th century BCE, we have the Code of Hammurabi. Has anyone heard of the Code of Hammurabi? So it's the first legal code. And most of the legal code is based on commercial transaction because really the origins of civilization are the beginning of commerce. As soon as people said, I will trade you, I will barter you, I will sell you, instead of killing you for what you have, then you have the advent of civilization, and so we have the Code of Hammurabi. And in the Code of Hammurabi, there are 10 laws. This is the stela, one of the stelas of the Code of Hammurabi, and it's on display in some museum where they stole it from where they found it. And if we go to Yale, We can see this is the entire code up here. We won't be jumping up and down there, but starting from 215, and I think there's 264 tenets of the Code of Hammurabi. We have the first legal code for physicians. If a physician make a large incision with an operating knife and cure it, or he open a tumor over the eye with an operating knife and save the eye, he shall receive 10 shekels in money. That's the first reimbursement rules that you have seen. If a physician healed a broken bone or diseased soft part of a man, the patient shall pay the physician 5 shekels in money. And but look at 218. This is the penalty for a malpractice. If a physician make a large incision with the operating knife and kill him, or open a tumor with the operating knife and cut out the eye, his hands shall be cut off. So that was a heck of a penalty. So that's the Code of Hammurabi from the 18th century BCE, and we skip ahead now to ancient Egypt. So that is known as the Edwin Smith papyrus. Now I want to say something. There's no slideshow here, and there's no PowerPoint. Everything I'm showing you is live internet. And the reason I chose live internet is because anyone can replicate these results with a few clicks of your mouse on Google. So I want you to understand that this is all settled knowledge, and you may replicate this on your own. So this is one of the oldest papyrus that has been the Edwin Smith, talking about the chief of dentists and physicians in the 27th century BCE, and that was for King Dozier. Let's go to the next one. And these are the operating tools. They did a lot of brain surgery in ancient Egypt, and we could see it from this hieroglyph. And if you want to see what they really looked like, let's go to the next one. These are the actual medical tools. So they used to access the brain by the nose, and they used to, of course, pull it out before they would embalm you. Now, the 3rd BCE, Imhotep was the designer of the first step pyramid. Let's go there. Let's go down a little bit. So everybody knows, I think, that that's a camel. But in addition, you all know what the classic pyramid looks like, right? But this was the first attempt to make a pyramid. It was the step pyramid. And Imhotep made this, and eventually they were able to smooth it out through architectural advance. But this man who invented that, Imhotep, is also known as the father of medicine. Okay, Imhotep means one who comes in peace, and it was he who termed the brain Ba, and he felt that the brain was, there's no other way to say this, but it was the doo-doo of the soul, and had to be expunged in order for your soul to go down the river to a peaceful eternity. And in one of his papyrus reliefs, it talks about patient number 6, where his brain is being palpated while he's alive in order to relieve some distress. So the brain was, of course, the first organ to be removed. I want you to know it wasn't just one doctor. There were many doctors during ancient Egypt performing all types of surgery with surgical tools and skills. There was Hesri at 2600 BC, the chief of dentists, Pesachit, who was the lady overseer of female physicians. In 2500, Kar, the royal physician, Mereruka, the vizier under King Teddy, and many others. So I'm just showing you how medicine progressed. And remember, during all this time, the purpose of medicine is to protect and cure the individual. That will change soon. But let's go to the next one. Oh, this is Imhotep, which means this is the father of medicine. This is an actual contemporaneous replica of him, and his name means the one who comes in peace. Next. And this is the first Hippocratic Oath. This Hippocratic Oath is from the 5th century BCE, and if you want to see what it actually says, does anyone here read the Greek, or anyone a Greek salad? Nothing like that? Okay. Let's go to the next one. All right, so this is the actual Hippocratic Oath from Hippocrates, and it does not resemble the modern oath. The modern oath is a different oath, like do no harm. That is a Victorian invention, and here is the real one, and it says, I swear by Apollo the physician, etc., etc., etc. But amongst the precepts they knew back in the 5th century BCE, I will not give a lethal drug, even if asked, nor will I advise such a plan. Okay. Nor did they believe in abortion. That's the very next sentence. I will not give a pessary to cause abortion. And this page, by the way, is from NIH. So now we're going to go to the advent of public health. So, we're not ready yet, but how did public health begin? How did they make the jump from the Hippocratic Oath in ancient Greece, which was in the 5th century, to about 380 BC with Plato, the beginning of public health? What does that mean? The health of the community, the health of the city, the health of our people is more important than the health of the individual. And it began with a plan for secret murder. So, next. This is Plato's Republic, 380 BC, and it's got hundreds of sections, and I've highlighted this because it was the origin of what many of you know as eugenics, which was the attempt to eliminate what was deemed to be the unfit or those who did not conform to a certain racial or physical standard. And it says here, the offspring of the good, I suppose they will take to the pen or creche to certain nurses who live apart in a quarter of the city, but the offspring of the inferior, what they thought was the inferior, and any of those of the other sort who are born defective, we will properly dispose of in secret so that no one will know what has become of them. You've all heard that in ancient Sparta, they would look at the kids right after the birth, and if they weren't born, they would bathe them in wine, and if they weren't born, they would throw them down the hill. It says here, we will dispose of them in secret, and no one will know what has become of them. In point of fact, they were thrown into a chasm on Mount Taygetos, and this chasm was known as the apothete, which in Greek means deposit. And here's the chasm. Next. This is the actual hole that many, many infants were thrown down, and when they excavated it, they found many skulls and bones and things of that nature. And this concept of eugenics, which was reinvigorated in the 19th century by Francis Galton, this concept began there, and they cited it. But it wasn't just the ancient Greeks. It was also their replacements in the Roman Empire. And if we go into the Roman law of the 12 tables, table 4, rule 1, let's go to the next one. A dreadfully deformed child shall be killed quickly. And remember, this is in the eyes of the beholder, okay? So whereas medicine was supposed to make the weak stronger, cure the infirm, support those who needed assistance. Once we made this jump into public health, then it was decided that we're not even going to bother, and we will play God and decide who lives and who dies. So now we talk about some of this ancient wisdom and the misconceptions of ancient wisdom that survived, especially from the ancient Greek and Romans. Everybody knows what the word hysteria means, right? And hysterectomy. And that word is Greek for uterus. And it was thought by the menfolk who devised this idea that the cause of hysteria was some kind of uncontrolled wild sensations in the uterus. Not having one, they thought that that's what it was. So wild therapies were devised, including many internal massagers. And in the Industrial Revolution, a steam-powered dildo was created, and they used powerful douching methods, and this was a means of modern health. Let's go to the next one, and there is our steam-powered dildo right here. And I don't know who designed these little extra doodads on there, and there's the patent in 1891. And of course, it proceeded on with Harvey Kellogg of the cornflakes fame. Now remember, Harvey Kellogg is not the guy from the Kellogg Cornflakes Company. He invented the cornflakes, and his family then stole the recipe and developed it commercially. He had a lot of incredibly crazy ideas related to the sex organs. He applied acid to the sexual gonads of both men and women. He had a giant sanitarium. I actually gave a lecture on a year or two ago, got a Human Rights Award there, right in some of the self-same rooms that that was in this giant sanitarium, which is now a federal kind of a inventory agency. And let's go to the next one. And we see a picture of some of the goofy stuff that he was doing. They had all kinds of acid enemas, coffee enemas, everything you could think of. And in case you think this is wacko, his greatest patrons were John D. Rockefeller and a guy called J.C. Penney. Okay. Now you know about lunacy, right? Lunacy was derived from the Roman word. We're talking about the surviving great medical mileposts of the industrial era. Lunacy is the Roman word for moon. It was thought that, in the same way that the moon tugs on the tides, the full moon, it also tugs on the brain. And so your brain expands, it gets a little crazy, and this is why they say you're howling in the moon, at the moon. In 1330, in England, there was a church rightfully called Bethlehem, okay? And this church, Bethlehem, was converted to an institution for lunatics, for the insane. Eventually, the church Bethlehem got shortened down into Bedlam. So Bedlam comes from Bethlehem. And I've been to Bethlehem, and it is Bedlam there sometimes. But so let's go to the next picture, see some Bedlam. So we have all these various pictures of people doing goofy, crazy things, and they were kept in such miserable condition and in such depraved and neglected conditions that if they weren't nuts when they went in, they became nuts just staying there, pleading with everybody to say that they weren't nuts. And as a result of this thing in 1330 with Bedlam, there were many commissions to delve into lunacy and what to do about it. We're talking modern health. The Physician Commission resulted in the 1774 Madhouse Act. The metropolitan condition resulted in 2 more madhouse acts in the 1820s and 30s. There was an inquiry commission that resulted in another madhouse act in the 1840s. And then the lunacy commission that followed was the 1845 Lunacy and County Asylum Acts. So they tried to deal with medical conditions out of sheer ignorance, prejudice, lack of knowledge, but in every case, they acted like they were the experts, and they were infallible. All right, so now we're going to move to the rise of modern public health. Modern public health, not the ancient public health, where they wanted to kill everybody first and then see if they could survive. But like quarantine, does anyone know what the word quarantine means? 40, correct. All right, so let's go to the next one. The Black Death started really in the Mongols sieged the Asian Christian city of Kaffa, and they discovered bubonic plague. And this was the first, and I wrote a book about this when I wrote my history of the Mongols in Banking on Baghdad, because various waves of Mongols destroyed various parts of Baghdad and Iraq time and time again. One of the things the Mongols would do is they started bacterial warfare. They would take these dead and infected bodies and catapult them into the over the walls, and that was done. And when it was done so much that the disease spread, the Black Death actually arrived in Europe by sea from China. October 1347. 12 Genovese trading ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina through the Black Sea. The people gathered on the dock to greet the ships, and when they went aboard, all the sailors were dead. The first ghost ship, if you will. And not only were they dead or gravely ill, they were overcome with fever, unable to keep their food down. They were delirious and covered with these mysterious black boils that oozed blood and pus, and from that term comes the word Black Death. And from that, the Sicilian authorities ordered the fleet of death ships out of the harbor. It was too late, of course. The Black Death would kill more than 20 million people in Europe, almost 1/3 of the continent's population, the Oriental rat flea. From this activity in Sicily comes the Italian variant of 17th century Venetian 40 giorni. They said all these ships will have to be isolated in the harbor for 40 days. Obviously, they were using, 40 days and 40 nights. Everything is, 40 years in the desert. There's a lot of biblical 40s running around. So they use that, and that's where the word quarantine comes from, 40 giorni. Now, there have been many plagues and epidemics to follow the first big Black Death. In the 1830s, the sanitary movement in England, which was a total reform of conditions as cities began to build, and we moved very slowly from an agrarian world to an urbanized world. The sanitary movement in England and in Europe really had a war against filth. So there used to be grime, filth, dirt on everything. And it was their idea to scrub stuff, make it clean. So that was the sanitary movement. And there was a very important report that all doctors have in public health have studied, called the Sanitary Report of 1842 and the Public Health Report of 1848. So what was going on in England then migrated to the United States, and in the 1850s, the public health movement spread across the United States, where at that time we had sewage commissions because toilets, plumbing, street cleaners, garbage removal, pest control, all that was just being instituted across these various cities. Yet at the same time, as we go right into the 20th century, we still have 12 million urban horses spreading dung-borne disease. More, I wrote a book about the history of energy called Internal Combustion, and about when we made the switch from horse to horsepower and in cars. And at the turn of the 20th century, in the early in the early 2000s, there were 12 million urban horses pulling trolleys, doing mills. That's how he moved stuff. And they were dropping dead every day on the street. And they had dung, and they had, when it rained, there was horse manure swirling around on the streets. Let's go to the next one. And here we see a typical example of a horse right there in New York. They would just simply drop dead. They would be picked up, and they would be taken to many locations, including a place off New York City called Dead Horse Bay. Some of you may have heard about that. So we're in the 1850s, and now we're getting to the rise of vaccination, which is a leading tenet of public health. So there were ancient remedies for smallpox and other communicable diseases involving smearing the skin with some infectious material, or in China they would blow powdered scabs. They would take scabs, grind them up into a powder, maybe put some seasoning on them, and blow them into your nose. And this was called not inoculation, but variolation. So it was cross-infection with a lesser potent form, but that was the first way they would react to smallpox and epidemics like that. Let's go to the slide. And there we see an illustration of blowing this stuff up the guy's nose, which was not just done in China, it was done in Sudan. In Sudan, there was always a haggling in the market. How much for your kids' pustules? How much for scabs? And they had rituals and things of that nature. So we have modern vaccination. Of course, I'm sure all of you know that this began with Edward Jenner in 1796. He took a lesser pox, the cowpox, and injected it to create an immunity against the greater infection called smallpox. The word vaccination comes from vacca, which means cow. And a little known why he came upon this discovery, and he came upon this discovery because he knew that the milkmaids who were always milking the cows were less susceptible significantly to the smallpox. And here you see this is from medical societies, and so he would scrape off the cowpox to create an injectable vaccine against smallpox. In 1802, this method of suppressing smallpox became very widely accepted. In fact, it led to 112 leading members of London's Physical Society signed a testament to it, and in 1800, the co-founder of the Harvard Medical School finally introduced it into Boston, and in 1802, there were efforts to make it legal in the United States, and that's exactly what they did on a federal level. In 1813, the Vaccine Act. And here is the actual text. I went to Wikipedia because they have it there. It's easier to see. But according to the Act to Encourage Vaccination, first federal vaccination law in the history of the United States, the post office would deliver your vaccine for free if it were a certain weight. And that is the actual Federal Register, if you're interested in seeing it. So this is James Madison, the president who signed it, and he established a national vaccine agency with a national vaccine agent. And the post office was actually required to be the distributor of these vaccinations. Completely voluntary, but this is how it was done. This national attempt at vaccination was repealed 9 years later. Okay? Why was it repealed? Because in 1822, there was an outbreak in North Carolina because of a contaminated vaccine that was distributed by the federal vaccine agent. This is known as the contamination incident of North Carolina in 1821. I have a piece of from Google Books, and it just explains that it spread from town to town, and instead of giving out the vaccine, he actually gave out live smallpox. So he infected everybody. He did the opposite. It shows, I think, that a lot of the woes that people have experienced, have identified, are handling, processing, construction, marketing, etc. You know, I believe in modern medicine. I believe in modern science. And I will never tell you not to get vaccinated. But although I believe that'll be your doctor's decision and your personal decision. But while I believe in modern medicine and medical expertise, I know that medical expertise in modern medicine has been used like a Mack truck to go through ethics, morals, and human society. And there have been no crossing guards and no red lights to stop them, often until it's too late. And so in the North Carolina incident, they had 60 people were infected in one little part of North Carolina. 10 people perished, and it was repealed. Next slide. And so this is the Raleigh Register from 1822, and they have now voted in the House of Representatives of the United States to repeal this law. So those of you who are thinking you're opposed to vaccination for whatever reason you have, which I won't argue or debate with you, you're not the first. So it was repealed. Now in 1853, the UK required universal vaccination against smallpox in England and Wales. This is compulsory vaccination. That's the big shift. 1853, compulsory vaccination. And they would issue a fine, a monetary fine, if you would fail to get the vaccination. The law was updated every few years, and that resulted in a mass rebellion of individuals and groups, and they promulgated the concept of death the vaccinator, because they thought that the vaccinator gave death. There were organized resistance through the Vaccination League, the Anti-Vaccination League, and the Anti-Compulsory Vaccination League, and this was a full movement across the UK that spread overseas. Let's go to the next one. Here is death the vaccinator actually on an envelope being used for some ordinary correspondence in Canada. And then shortly after that, they finally made the jump of logic. And they said, why are they trying to push these vaccines on us? Hit the next slide. There's money in it. And so there you have the same illustration from the envelope with our same buddy, Death the Vaccinator. And now they're saying there's money, 20,000 victims will be vaccinated within the next few days in the city under the present alarm that will put $10,000 inside the pockets of the medical profession. And that is when they finally made the leap. That did not stop riots throughout England. In Ipswich, there was a massive anti-vaccination demonstration in Leicester in 1885 that attracted up to 100,000 people. A royal commission was then, after 100,000 people rioted, was then appointed to investigate the anti-vaccination grievances as well as to hear evidence in favor of vaccination. And this commission lasted for 7 years. For 7 years, they weighed the evidence. And finally, in 1896, they concluded that, that the smallpox vaccine, if handled correctly, would in fact be a major protective agent against smallpox, but they recommended abolition of the financial penalties. So they gave it a point of choice. And in the new Vaccination Act of 1898, they removed these financial penalties if you could get a certificate of exemption based on your true conscience that you truly believed, and those people were called conscientious objectors. Similar movements flourished throughout Europe. In Stockholm, the majority of the population rebelled against vaccination. So here we have a youngster's vaccination from 1871, I think it is. And that's just a typical one. And, but there was an impact. After vaccination rates in Stockholm fell to just 40% of the population taking vaccination, whereas the rest of Sweden had a 90% rate, there was a huge epidemic fear. And in 1874, they had such an epidemic, and it led to a widespread enforced vaccination, and that was an end to further epidemics of smallpox in Stockholm and Sweden. Let's go to the next one, see what we have. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, we're a little ahead, but in 1855, I'll just tell you, the first U.S. mandatory vaccination law passed in a state. And that was the 1855 U.S. vaccination law of Massachusetts. And it has been said that just hours after delivering the Gettysburg Address in 1863, President Lincoln fell ill and was taken back to the White House covered in smallpox, and his personal aide actually died of smallpox. So we're moving into the 20th century, and in Brazil, they had a huge riot called the Vaccination Revolt, the Vaccine Revolt. And the public health soldiers forcibly entered the homes, forcibly injecting people, and this resulted in a huge riot. 30 people were left dead, 110 wounded, hundreds imprisoned, and many people were deported to a frontier region penal facility. Here is an article. The anti-vaccination riots result in death of 12, injury to 60. Water and gas mains are cut in Rio de Janeiro. Let's go to the next one. Here's another little picture. Here they're overturning all the buses. They were going completely wild there in 1904. The next year in 1905, there was a pastor in Massachusetts. And you remember I told you that Massachusetts had the first mandatory law. This was Pastor Jacobson. He refused his vaccination. He refused to pay the fine, which was what you would call today, in today's money, about 120 bucks. And he said, quote, he and his son had had bad reactions to earlier vaccinations, so I'm not doing it. He was fined $5, which is today 130 bucks. He appealed to the Supreme Court. Massachusetts was one of 11 states with compulsory vaccination. And SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States of America, in a very important ruling, ruled, quote, the state may be justified in restricting individual liberty. This was the case, vaccination, that set the police powers of the state, that codified the police powers of the state over the individual to personal freedom. And let's go to the next one. Anyway, what it says in here is it's all based on one thing. In a free society, everybody in the city cannot set up their own law. There is freedom, there is liberty, but there is regulation of freedom and liberty. And so it all stems from police powers. And that was the basis for Jacobson versus Massachusetts. Very important test case. Then we get to the influenza pandemic of 1918 and 1919, which killed more people than the Great War, World War I. And in World War I, 17 million people died. 21 million people were injured. And by the way, nobody knows why. I've written many books on World War I, and there's no historian, no scholar who will ever tell you what the hell they were fighting about. Yeah. So, but more than the 17 million, 20 to 40 million people died of the flu. More people died of the flu in a single year than in the 4 years of the Black Death, the bubonic plague from 1347 to 1351. It was known as the Spanish flu. And this helped push the rise of eugenics in America, where they said, we must build a stronger man. And we must build a stronger man by getting rid of what we think are the weaker people. And this is where Francis Galton, and I did do extensive research on this in my book, War Against the Weak, which some of you have got, and which has been course adopted from Harvard to Chico. I don't know why Chico. And, well, maybe Sacramento then. Francis Galton, the nephew of Charles Darwin, and remember there was no such thing as social Darwinism with Darwin. That was invented by somebody else, Spencer. So eugenics was Galton's idea that if good, wealthy, intellectual men married good, wealthy, intellectual women, out would come good, wealthy, intellectual children. In other words, they saw the poverty, they saw the overcrowding, and they said the best way to solve this is to get rid of the people and get a better type of people. And we'll do that just by marrying well. It was a kind of a positive thing. All that in 1901 was re-put together with the rediscovery of Mendel's principles of heredity, which said if you take a straight pea and a smooth pea and you put the two peas together, there's always going to be a bad pea in there. And so they believed that that humans were like peas, and they could be culled the way you would cull a field of wheat or a herd of cattle, by killing off the bad stock and by accentuating the good stock. And in 1908, they came up with some principles. Of course, this is all supported by Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Institution, and the Harriman Railroad fortune. They had the best scientists, the best pseudoscientists. They invented this wacko self-certifying science, which became the best science of the day. And they said the best way to do this is with public gas chambers. A doctor will write a prescription out for a gas chamber, and you'll go in and out you'll come dead. And the first attempt to enter this into state law was in Ohio in 1908. They called it euthanasia, mercy killing, because they felt it would be more merciful for you not to exist. And it was never about you. It was about you and your unborn children. That's what they worried about. Not you, your unborn children. Because they could take a black man, is what they would say, dress him up in a toga, and teach him Latin, and they said that does not make him a Roman. And they believed that you weren't born into poverty, poverty was born into you as a genetic trait. Criminality was born into you as a criminal trait, born criminals. And they believed the shape of your head and the closeness of your eyes were a broadcast system for whether you would have beady eyes and the criminal look. So they thought the best way to improve society was to get rid of 99% of everyone on the planet. And believe me, these were the do-gooders, the progressives. These were the people who wanted to improve society. And the way they wanted to improve society, to uplift society, was by gas chamber, lethal injection, marriage voiding. They didn't like who you married. You married between the races. They would unmarry you. Marriage prohibition. And medical incarceration, medical concentration camps that they called sanitariums. Invention of fake medical diagnoses. And all of this was debate. There were ultimately 27 states that adopted these eugenic legislations, including because they couldn't get gas chambers in, they went for solution number 2, forced surgical sterilization. That means that they would trick you into getting your tubes tied, because they believed that if they could stop you and your bloodline, they could improve the world. So ultimately, this was tested in a famous court case, Buck versus Bell. Carrie Buck was what they called white trash. She was an Appalachian girl. She was raped by the sheriff's nephew. She was in the house, and he raped her, and so she had a child. And of course, they believed that she was destined, she was genetically predisposed to this type of life. And so they said, we will forcibly sterilize Carrie Buck, her mother, and her new child. So that is, and by the way, this was all super medical. This was all super scientific. Hey, have you ever heard the term imbecile? Or would you call that an insult? You would. How about idiot? You would. Did you know that the word idiot and imbecile and moron were technical scientific terms of intelligence testing that had been widely adopted? I see this guy knows, he goes all the way back. And you know that those terms were used in the education world as legitimate measures, what they called legitimate measures of the individual. And so they said she is an imbecile. And how they know she was an imbecile? You're not going to believe this, but the Chicago Municipal Court colluded with the Carnegie Institution to make remote diagnoses of people they had never seen and say she is feeble-minded, she's an imbecile, she needs to go, her progeny need to go, her mother needs to go. And so they had a collusive lawsuit. Somebody said, okay, all these states have these forced surgical sterilization laws, but they're afraid to apply them because they're unconstitutional. Let's get a case up to the Supreme Court. And so one guy who was a eugenicist colluded with another lawyer who was a eugenicist. He represented Carrie Buck. He sued the institution. The institution went back and forth with fake litigation. They called in the Municipal Court of Chicago. It went up, they lost, it was on appeal, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court in the famous case. And in the famous case, Buck versus Bell, let's go to the next one that everybody knows. It is Oliver Wendell Holmes, greatest jurist, they say, in the history of the United States. We think, maybe, maybe not. It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, future, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. This is a Supreme Court decision. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccinations is broad enough. What's the quote? Jacobson versus Massachusetts, vaccination. Next. Just after that, you have the Dallas disaster. Dozens of Dallas children are infected with a TAT diphtheria vaccination that is mixed wrong, mixed lousy, isn't refrigerated correctly. And there's another example of a potentially life-saving opportunity turned deadly. 5 years later, in 1924, there's a disaster in Connecticut and Massachusetts. 25 children in Bridgewater and 20 in Concord were poisoned by the same TAT toxin, antitoxin. And one of the photographs published in 1924 by the Boston American showed such a tortured child that had motivated the entire community to stop these serums, and after an investigation they discovered these serums can work if they're kept on ice and refrigerated, which was not so easy in rural parts in 1924. A little bit later that year, we have 40 students outside of Vienna. 6 died, a number suffered from skin necrosis, various sizes at the site of the injection. The mixture had been tested on guinea pigs and declared non-toxic. As a result of the investigation, the Austrian Ministry of Health demanded to stop the inoculations, and for a long time, the practice was forbidden in Austria. In 1927, there were 5 deaths from immunized children in China. 37 were made seriously ill. There are cases where this stuff does not work. It does the opposite. Cases where it can save a city and cases where it can kill a community. In 1928, The Lancet, February 4th, 28, referred to a recent Russian disaster, quoting from the Bulletin of Hygiene. 14 children received the toxin in place of the antitoxin. And 8 of them died within 2 weeks, 4 of polyneuritis within a month, and 2 recovered after general intoxication. And that same year, in 28, there was a terrible disaster at Bundaberg, Australia, where 12 out of the 17 children inoculated in one school died, the other 5 being critically ill for some time. Let's go to the next thing. In the 30s, 38 children at the Ring Irish College in County Waterford had been inoculated with one of these bad mixtures, and 24 of the 38 developed tuberculosis, and 1 died immediately thereafter. And then they discover that between 1930 and 1936, 2,051 children and babies in various Irish care homes, welfare homes, custody homes, foster homes were given a single shot of diphtheria vaccine from the international drug giant known as Burroughs Wellcome. Not so welcome in Ireland. 800 infants were found dead, hidden, secreted into a septic tank. It was the tip of the iceberg for secret vaccination trials in Ireland. Hit the next one. This is one of these Irish orphanages where these kids were given cheap, misused, formulated, misprocessed diphtheria vaccine. Next. You go to a Daily Mail, it says that old medical records show that 2,051 children and babies in Irish care homes were given a one-shot diphtheria from Burroughs Wellcome between 1930 and 1936. Consent was never sought, and they buried the evidence. This is a small region, and they killed thousands, and they probably killed more than 2,000. These are the ones that were discovered. Okay, now we go to political health abuses. Nazi medicine. As you know, American eugenics in the 19-teens and the 1920s was transplanted knowingly by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Institution into Nazified Germany, into the Hitler circles, where they actually sponsored the doctor who sent Mengele into Auschwitz with his twin research. And as you know, Mengele was a eugenicist. His boss, Otmar Verschuur, thought that he could identify the secret of mass subtraction of the unwanted and the quick multiplication of the better stock by these horrible experiments on twins. He would inject one with a blue eye, one with a brown eye. He would, some cases, do surgery and fuse all their blood vessels together into one macabre being, and always a live autopsy. And at the end of the week, motorcycle the medical information to his Rockefeller fellowed and financed boss, Otmar Verschuur, who later became one of the founding members of the World Genetics Society. Next, we go to sluggish schizophrenia. Sometimes I feel like I have that. This was Soviet psychiatry. Anyone who disagreed with the Soviet Union had a medical diagnosis under Article 70 of the Criminal Code, and they were put into places like the St. Petersburg Psychiatric Hospital, meaning that there was an actual psychiatric diagnosis for people who criticized the state, who criticized Stalin. They're not doing that yet here. And that was, they're not doing it yet, right? Okay. And so that's Article 70 of the, and it's a symptom of mental illness, because what they're saying, why would anyone criticize the state unless they were insane? So that's why it was a medical diagnosis. So now, let's move into emergency, compulsory, mass vaccination. Is it possible? Absolutely yes. They'll do it in a hurry. There will be an emergency. They won't check, they won't balance, and they'll just have collateral damage. And the best case we have for that is the 20th century, 1947 in New York City. Next. Smallpox in New York City. Mexican businessman Eugene Labar traveled by bus to New York from Mexico, carried some smallpox with him. They weren't even sure, but worried that a smallpox epidemic would spiral out of control in New York City. Over 6 million people were vaccinated within 30 days in New York City. They were lined up, that's one example, at hospitals, firehouses, police stations, vaccination stations. 5 million doses were dispensed within 2 weeks. President Truman flew in to volunteer to take one of the first shots. In all, how many people caught smallpox? 12. 2 of them, including the Mexican who brought it with him, died. Adverse reactions to the vaccine, 48 cases of encephalitis, 6 people died. Next case of mass compulsory vaccination, 1962 in Wales. A Pakistani had a smallpox outbreak in Rwanda. 25 people contracted smallpox. 6 of them died, including a 9-month-old baby. As the epidemic grew, so did the public clamor for vaccination. And in South Wales, hit the next one. 900,000 people in Wales were quickly vaccinated. They can do it, folks. Modern forced quarantine under public health. Can they do it? In 1906 to 1938, there was a New York cook named Mary Mallon. Anyone know who she was? Typhoid Mary. She was a cook. She went from household to household. Wherever she went, the people contracted typhoid fever, but she never got sick. Hit the next click. That's her. And one day, finally, there were no regulations to deal with her. They just arrested her. They quarantined her from time to time and place to place. She said she was being prosecuted for no crime. She finished her life in Riverside Hospital, in quarantine. And she finally died in 1938 from a stroke. Only after an autopsy were authorities able to prove she absolutely carried the typhoid bacteria in her gallbladder. So her name was Mary Mallon, but most people in the group know her nickname became Typhoid Mary. 2003, okay, 21st century. SARS, anyone heard of SARS? Hong Kong, March 31st, 2003. 19,000 residents of the Amoy Gardens housing complex woke up and found their building was surrounded. 19,000 people. In Toronto, 15,000 were voluntarily quarantined. In 2009, Hong Kong itself quarantined 286 guests at the famous Metropole Hotel for 7 days after one Mexican traveler stayed in room 911 because it was said that he had contracted the swine flu. Ultimately, they cleared him. The hundreds of guests were released from this luxury hotel. That hotel tried to change the room so no one would know where room 911 was. But if we go on TripAdvisor, let's go to the next one. There it is. It's now known as 913. Anybody know who Casey Hickox is? October 24th, 2014. We're not going into 9,000 years ago anymore. Casey Hickox returns to the United States, specifically New Jersey, it's New Jersey, from Africa, where she was treating Ebola patients. She was held at the airport in Newark after being moved to a quarantine. She was then imprisoned in a field tent in an unheated parking garage at University Hospital. She had access to a portable toilet, but no shower. She had to ask for extra blankets. She wasn't allowed to return to her home until October 27th of 2014. She sued. Let's see a picture of this gal. That's her behind the plastic, right there. She was quarantined. There was anything wrong with her. So now we're going to take this from one Sicilian city to one nation to a planetary approach. International health regulations. That means unelected governance. That means the decisions will not be in Sacramento. They'll be made in Stockholm and Brussels. Okay, let's talk about it. 1920, League of Nations creates a new organization, which in 1945 was renamed, let's hit the thing, that's the World Health Organization. September 4th, 2016, Barack Obama, he signed a document known as Advancing the Global Health Security Agenda to achieve a world, it's an EO, executive order, world safe and secure from infectious disease. And directive number 2 says that there will be a policy group that will decide who must be quarantined and who must be inoculated in what they call a global emergency. And this group sitting on this policy is the group of 7, the G8, then 7, the G20, the African Union, the HWO, Interpol, the EU, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Economic Community of West African Nations, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And all of these would be the relevant partners. National Strategy for Countering Biological Threats, and there it's signed by the President of the United States. We now have something called international health regulations. They're not county regulations. They're not state regulations. They're not federal regulations. They're international health regulations. And at the 13th conference held recently of the International Health Regulations Organization, which involves 196 states, a public health emergency of international concern, that concept, the PHEIC, Public Health Emergency of International Concern, was created. And that means that these guys can declare a public health emergency. I'm not saying we won't have such a thing. I'm not saying it will not be required. I'm not saying we will not be threatened by an incredible virus that'll make the world end with a whimper and not a bang. I'm not saying any of that. I'm telling you what is possible and what can be used and misused. And under Article 12, this emergency can be declared under the IHR, the International Health Regulations, and they can create emergency committees, transnational emergency committees. And under Annex 6 and 7, Annex 6 and 7 of the Emergency Health Regulations, International Health Regulations, there will be no compulsory vaccination, but you will not be able to travel outside your house without proof of vaccination. So they can't force you to take a vaccination, but you will not be able to travel without the certificate of vaccination. In a further decision, it says that they have the ability to restrain certain groups of people that, don't laugh, you'll be not laughing real soon, who they think are a special threat to international health order. Next. Here they are under 5.2.6, the urban, poor, and migrant populations, remote, difficult to reach, and nomadic populations, persons living in areas of civil conflict or insecurity, populations resisting vaccination, the guy who laughed, and anti-vaccine groups, including affluent communities. How you doing down there in Palo Alto? And religious and fundamentalist groups. Undocumented urban settlers and squatters. You should see what I had to go through in San Francisco to get to the restaurant. Let's see who created this list. Go up to the top. World Health Organization. And in May 24th of either last year or something, in Geneva, the WHO, in Resolution 67, supporting what they would and would not find credible. Let's go to the next one. Resolution 67. There is no valid scientific evidence that childhood vaccination leads to autism spectrum disorders. Says on my script, what does it say on the script? Last line.
The next step, unknown.
So, 9,000 years of public health. The species jump from individual health to public health, community health. The use of medical nomenclature in pseudoscience to advance corporate interests and inflict political damage upon political enemies. Maybe not in California, but in Russia, Soviet Russia, North Korea, China. That's why they use terms like re-education camps, Nazi Germany, all these places. And now you're under unelected governance. So what does all this mean and where is it all going? I can't tell you the medical appropriateness of your situation. I can't even speculate. I won't answer your questions. I'll refer to Ken or any of the other 9 doctors here. But what I will tell you, that if we look at ancient, near-term, recent history, and the history now being written for us, we can see there is reason to be concerned, and we should continue to challenge and to ask for evidence, and to not be silenced by people who have big degrees, big money, and big reports, like they did in eugenics, like they did with the Carnegie Institution, the Rockefeller Foundation, like they have done in all these cases to stifle dissent and increase profits. Thank you very much. So now, let's turn that off. And so now, let's turn this thing off. Now I'll take some questions, one at a time, no statements, just real questions because it's a long drive back. And why don't you come up here? Just because I have a limited amount of wire. Always give me a limited amount. What's your name?
My name's Dave.
How'd it go, Dave?
It went well. I wonder if there's maybe a parallel story also to be told here, which is that certain aspects of public health are being abandoned at the same time. So what used to be called euthenics, nutrition, clean water, sanitation, and education. These aspects are being abandoned at the same time that we're picking up these technological pseudo-fixes. So I wonder if that might be a part of it.
Yes, because that's a great question, thank you. What you see in the third Death the Vaccinator, where they say, it's about the money. They didn't say it's about the money, stupid, but they said it's about the money. They said what you just said. What about sanitation? What about proper sewage? What about proper household cleanliness? All of these types of things, which of course are essential, quintessential to a healthy home and a healthy environment, which is what the Mongols knew would not happen if they put dead bodies over the wall. And it's the quick fix. And can you imagine an emergency of 900,000 people within a few weeks, how much money those doses will generate? And you have to look not at the individual, but these huge waves. I haven't even given you a fraction of the other future regulations that are planned, the future programs that are planned, these giant vaccination efforts, and these giant attempts to undercut those who would challenge these vaccination efforts. And I can tell you, it didn't take long for the head of one of the vaccination federal bureaus to leave one day and turn up the next day as Merck's president of their vaccination division. I'm sure you know that. Thank you for that important question. Please come up.
So I would think that current proponents of compulsory vaccinations would argue that the science is so sophisticated that the historical examples that you gave of people dying after vaccines, that's not relevant to today's compulsory
No, that's not
laws.
what they're going to say. What they're going to say is, your argument is not relevant. These cases are relevant, but they're going to think that you never put it together in sequence and don't have all the cases of all the people who have died under these mass inoculation regimens.
So what would the argument be to proponents of compulsory vaccines, that if they say, well, it's only a 1 in a million, that that's the only casualty that there is.
Right, because they're breaking eggs and they're trying to make an omelet.
Whatever it is.
Right.
What would your argument be to people that say, well, it's just 1 in a million?
Okay. Thank you for your question. First off, I don't make arguments. You're going to do that. But you're going to have the information. And wherever I go, I provide the information. I provide it in a factual basis, not from a slideshow or my private PowerPoint that I made in my basement with some funny graphics in Microsoft. Hope there's no Microsoft employees here. But stuff from settled information, even Wikipedia, even as bad as Wikipedia knows a lot of this stuff with pictures, etc. And so what you have to do is look at the precedents, look at the antecedents, look at the test results, look at the examples. If they can stare you in the face and talk about all of these cases of mass death, mass casualty, the Irish cases, the 2,000 infants in a short period of time, all these unnecessary mass vaccinations of 2 million people in New York City within 30 days. If they can do that, then obviously you are having the same argument that decent people had when they argued against the Nazis and the American pseudo-medical establishment, who said that some people are not fit to exist on this planet. So you need moral clarity and knowledge. Moral clarity and knowledge. You need to stick to it, which is why everything I put you can find on the internet with a couple of clicks. I can't have your argument for you, but I can make you much stronger, much more fortified, much more persuasive, and much more successful in that argument. Thank you. Let's hear from this woman. What's your name?
Christina Hildebrand.
What's going on, Christine?
So I fight this every day in Sacramento. My question for you is, so we in this
How long
room,
will it take to drive to Sacramento tomorrow?
what time? 2 hours to 2.5 hours. It depends on what time.
Don't say that. Okay.
You don't want to go during rush hour.
All right.
But my question for you is, so first of all, one thing with the 1918, I know you said no statements, but 1918 flu pandemic, all of those people were vaccinated.
Wow.
My question for you is, pharma has
All those people were vaccinated?
all those people were vaccinated.
And 22 million died or
Yes.
40 million died?
Connect the dots, yes. My question for you is, Big Pharma has the largest lobbying agency, spends the most money, has advertising money up the wazoo.
Correct.
Gets it out there. Fear, 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 fear. You're
Correct.
going to get a disease. You're going to die. You've got to be vaccinated. How do we fight that? What I listen to this and I'm just like, I fight it every day on a day-to-day basis, but I don't know what.
All right, thank you for your question. How do you fight it? Look, I spent my whole life fighting misinformation, false history, false news, false science. This is our mission for the thinking people on our planet, in our community. What makes your job triply difficult is they have more money than you.
Yes.
They pay the people who make the laws.
Yes.
They employ them as soon as they leave office, before they leave office. They sponsor the programs. If you've been in Washington, you know that the American Pharmaceutical Association is right there next to the Organization of American States. It looks like a giant embassy or something. So the answer is, you have additional reason to be fearful. Not only because of what I've documented from the clear past, not only from what I've documented from our clear present, but the coming storm in the future. Can you imagine if you will just add these international decisions to AI? And then AI decides, we have now detected a certain spike in a certain region, in a certain hotel, in a certain neighborhood, in a certain country. Maybe we have it, maybe we don't. Maybe we want to sell an extra 1 million doses, maybe we don't. And so these are the things that we need. This is another worry for you. So, however scared you were this morning, you'll be more scared tomorrow morning.
I understand that, but
When I come, it's never good news, it's always bad news. I'll take one more question and that'll be that. This fine woman here. Come on up.
So,
Come on
I try
up. What's your
Carol,
name?
my name is Carol.
Carol.
And
I got it.
I try really hard not to live my life by doom and gloom.
Yeah.
But basically, is this just like a worldwide planned genocide? Is that what it is?
No, it's not planned. It's not a worldwide planned genocide, but if one comes along, it can be enhanced by the guys who always want to make a buck off of misery. So there is no conspiracy. There's no international conspiracy, but there are international actors who are acting in concert. And they have a plan. They have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 1-year plan, a 3-year plan, and they plan to increase their dosages exponentially, inject them in mass situations, generally in childhood. Vaccinate the planet, not one shot at a time, 14, 20 shots at a time, all over Africa, all over Asia. They'll have nothing to say. They'll have nothing to say about it. They'll never know it's happening. Their representatives will be feted in nice hotels in Switzerland and New York. They'll all sign on the dotted line. It will be done legally, but we can't fight back. And I'm not telling you to abandon vaccination, but we can't fight back on the intelligent opportunity to have vaccination, the intelligent opportunity to utilize a medical solution without the knowledge. And that much I've given you today. Oh, wait a minute. We have one more question from my friend Mark, who is from Sacramento. Mark, give me your question. Hey, Mark, how'd it go?
It was great, Edwin, as it always is with you.
Thank you. And thank you for driving me here.
My pleasure.
Go ahead.
And
thank you for the paella we're having tomorrow at your house.
In Sacramento. That's right. And I fight big oil every day.
And I fight it with him.
And so we, I don't know if who has more money, big oil or big pharma, but
I fought IBM, I fought Ford, I fought General Motors successfully. I fought Carnegie, Rockefeller, New Israel Fund, even Sears Roebuck, okay? And I won every time, but you must have your facts. You must transcend from suspicion to certification of your documentation, and that's why I'm here. What's your question?
So, this is sort of a personal thing, because
Yeah.
it has to do with my business partner.
Yeah, what's
who
up?
recently had bone marrow cancer.
Okay.
And so he went through the whole process and went through the chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And then the stem cell
Yeah.
stuff.
Uh-huh.
And supposedly, starting in January, he gets the inoculations to go through the whole process again as if he was a child.
How many oh, you mean all the new like the childhood inoculations?
Right, yes,
What,
to go
14,
through
20?
Something. So his question to me to ask is that a good thing to do or a bad thing to do?
Is that a good thing to do? He's a grown man and he's going through childhood
He's
inoculation.
going to have to. He's 76 years old.
Okay. Is there a pediatrician in the house? I know there's 3. Who wants to step up to the plate? You are a pediatrician, right? All right, come on up and tell us. What? Does anyone have an idea? How wise is it to take a wide assemblage of rapid inoculations?
It's totally insane.
Pardon me?
Talk to me.
Talk to you? Go ahead.
At the age of 30, I had 6 vaccinations to go on a trip, and they were all the ones that someone would get on a well baby visit, and it disabled me. I lost my career. I was running a worldwide research group at Apple, and it's 20 years later, and I'm only 70% recovered. Don't do it.
All right, you get in touch with me. I'll get you in touch with her. She claims she's in her 50s. Not possible. And listen, then thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you at the table.